እንዲሁም በአሳታፊነት የሚንሸራሸርበት ቤት በሐሳብ ገበታችን ወቅታዊ፣ ማህበራዊ፣ ፖለቲካዊ እንዲሁም የህግ ጉዳዮች በስፋት በጥልቀትና በአካታችነት ይቀርባሉ። የሳምንቱ እንግዳም የሳምንቱ ለተጋባዥ ማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች፣ ፖለቲከኞች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች የሚቀርቡበት ፕሮግራም ወቅታዊ ጉዳይ ወቅታዊ ሀገራዊ ጉዳዮች የሚዳሰሱበት ዝግጅት የውይይትና የክርክር መድረክ በተለያየ ጎራ የሚገኙ ታላላቅ ፖለቲከኞች፣ የማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች በሐሳብ ዙሪያ ፊት ለፊት የሚወያዩበት ከዛም አልፎ የሚሟገቱበት ፕሮግራም ህዝባዊ መድረክ በተለያዩ ጉዳዮች ላይ ሁሉም የሐሳብ ገበታ ቤተሰቦች በቀጥታ ሐሳባቸውን የሚያቀርቡበትና ተሳታፊ የሚሆኑበት ለቤተሰቦቻችን እድል የምንሰጥበት ጊዜም እነዚህና ሌሎች ሳምንታዊ ፕሮግራሞችን ለእናንተ እናቀርባለን። ይህንን የተወደደ ቻናል ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ ቤተሰብ ይሁኑ፣ በስፋት ተደራሽ እንዲሁም ለሌሎች ያጋሩም። የሐሳብ ገበታው እንዲጠናከር በተሻለ ጥራትና ስፋት ወደ እናንተ እንዲደርስ በሐሳቦ በሙያውና በገንዘቡ ይደግፉን። የሐሳብ ገበታን በሱፐር ቻት፣ በሱፐር ታንክስና በሱፐር ስቲከር አጋርነቱን ያሳዩን። በጎፈንድሚ አማራጭ የሐሳብ ገበታን ያበረታቱ። ስለ ሐሳብ አስተያየቶ እንዲሁም ድጋፎም እናመሰግናለን። ዓላማችን የሐሳብ ማህበረሰብ መፍጠር ነው። የሐሳብ ገበታም
Hello all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is the second episode of our Ethiopia Today podcast with our guest. Now he is not our guest, but the family of the Buffet of Ideas, Mr. Faisal Roble. Thank you for coming back, and we're going to discuss, of course, today on generally the issues pertaining to Ethiopia, as well as relevant for the greater Horn of Africa, and by focusing on the war, the ongoing war in the Amhara region, the talks between the Oromo Liberation Army and the federal government in Tanzania, and of course the politics of the Red Sea. Of course, we have touched up on it 2 weeks ago. Then we are going to pick on that following yesterday's parliamentary session, where the Prime Minister of Ethiopia have made some statements. So with that, welcome again. I welcome you all. We are going to have a very brief moment here. So you will do the much of the talking and explanation, Faisal, today. I will just ask you very short and brief because we have only 1 hour for this episode. So thank you very much. And if I may ask you, what are you up to? Because it has been more than 2 weeks since we met last time on a panel discussion. I think there is a lot going on in the diplomatic front as well as your own personal network. So please tell us what you have been up to, and before we delve into the main topic for our discussion today.
Thank you, Mogus. I really appreciate, and you're right. I've been, going around to DC and to Minneapolis, mainly talking about the issues that Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa is facing. In DC, I participated this conference hosted by a foundation, Open Society Foundation, co-sponsored by Refugee International and Amnesty. And then last week I was in Minneapolis at another conference for Somalis and Oromos in the area to have some sort of communication. And I hope that would be a beginning for a broader conversation among the rest of Ethiopians. So in general, in the aftermath of the Pretoria cessation of hostility agreement, which was mainly the conference in DC, I think there was an agreement that the cycle of violence in Ethiopia did not slow down, or it did not stop. In Tigray, it might have slowed down, but in the Amhara and Oromo region, conflict is still raging. Neither do we see any meaningful movement toward this peace and recovery in general. As we will discuss, Mogus, today, probably the Oromia war is still raging despite the Arusha talks, and we will, dive deeper into that. The Amhara region is the newest, in my opinion, human inferno, where heavy weapons are being used against not only the Fano militia, but settlements and villages in areas that are suspected of supporting the Fano troops. Worse, also without any independent news outlet reporting on this conflict, which is massive, we remain blind to the magnitude of civilian deaths. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, we don't know. All we know is that the conflict is very serious. And I'm very much afraid that by the time we realize and we get independent report on the Amara war, we will find out that it's in the hundreds of thousands of people perished, both as a result of lack of access to food, but at the same time direct impact from the war and from the drones and from the massive bombardment the government is doing in order to subjugate the people. Suffice here to say that the reports is coming from the villages and from local areas through the mouth and through independent reports is telling that we have to be really very concerned, and I think a movement should be started by now to do something about this conflict, both locally as well as internationally. In general, there is also a fragile peace in the Afar and Tigray region, although the rift within the TPLF could also bring a new conflict in Tigray, simply because there's a transition within TPLF, whether TPLF will exist from now on, or it will mutate, or it will completely perish and a new force will emerge from Tigray. We don't know, but that crisis is also looming large. The Somali region is relatively quieter than, because of ONLF is really patiently waiting something to happen at the federal level and the agreement that is signed with the current PP regime to be implemented, which has not been implemented. Just finally, I like to touch, Mogus, a little bit about the economic situation in Ethiopia, which in my opinion is very troubling. And all the data tells you that anybody who is watching Ethiopia should be concerned. According to the recent Moody's Investor Services Rating System, Ethiopia's ability to pay its debt is at CC rating, the lowest a country can be given. About $3 billion is expected for Ethiopia to pay in order to service the country's debt, money that the country and the National Bank of Ethiopia does not have. Neither the G20 countries or China is willing to bail it out. In a desperate move, we also heard that the Prime Minister recently went to Al Mudi, a Saudi Ethiopian-born billionaire, whom they asked to bail him out. However, Al Mudi was not willing also to do that, according to the reports that we have read or heard. In general, the economy of Ethiopia is weak, with a growth rate of 5% annually. That's exaggerated, but 5%. The last time Ethiopia's economy was healthier was in 2012, when it registered an impressive growth of 10%, and that continued for a while until we hit 2019, where a nosedive of Ethiopia's economic growth took place. And that condition, that bad condition of the economy, plus an average 34% inflation rate since 2019, is unabated. It's continuing. Worse, the economy is saddled with a huge public debt to the tune of 50% of the GDP, therefore dimming any prospect of any growth of the economy in the near future, unless policy and public policy is completely rehabbed and refashioned. As if that was not enough headache for the country, most of the spending that we see now is not going to industrial or infrastructural development that could have created employment for the public, but only going to demonstration projects that appeases the ruling elite clique, particularly the prime minister. And we have heard billions of dollars being spent on projects that may only be what in urban planning we call urban renewal projects that are morely glossy and for the consumption looking good. In worst case scenario, and we know this from literature, urban renewal does not really move the economy forward, nor does it enhance access of the masses of the Ethiopian people to goods and to services. We have tons of examples from the United States of America where urban renewal was hatched and where it was born. And the results that we have 60 years after urban renewal introduced into the cities of America are completely destruction of the inner city and poor people, particularly Black America. My fear is that both the residents of Addis Ababa, particularly those who hail from the Amara region as well as from Oromia region, although some groups might think that this is to their benefit, when we look back later on, some years from now, we will see that the masses have been hurt, and the very people that think that these demonstration projects are helping them will look backward and see that they bought an idea that was negatively impacting them. And with that, I will stop and I will have a discussion start.
Thank you, Faisal. And it looks very distressing. And of course, it's not just because you are saying it, but when we see the facts and the figures on the ground, and especially the trends over the last couple of years, not to mention the perfect storm created by the corona crisis, and of course the consumerist behavior of the state, as well as the devastating war. And as if that is not enough, now we are not learning. It seems that we are not reflecting on our recent history, and the way ahead is not also so promising. That said, it seems for me quite perplexing, and especially when I try to make sense of what you just said in light of the Prime Minister's explanation yesterday. It seems completely at a loggerhead with your statement. So we will discuss about that. But thank you for giving us the state of the economy and politics in Ethiopia. And that said, you said the Oromo region, and so it's better to say Oromia region. I think that is a slip of tongue. Then the rift, do you think the rift between, before we head to the next topic, do you think the rift within the Tigrayan politics in general, or particularly between the TPLF and the transitional government, will have a political dynamics that will affect the region as well as the national level? Do you really believe that will happen?
Well, I think I don't know if any from now on in the recent years that TPLF politics will have much impact on the general politics of Ethiopia. I think TPLF has been marginalized not only because of the war, but because of the fact that what it has done in the last 30 years in Ethiopia, plus it is many years retaining power within Tigray, has basically put TPLF in a precarious situation to have any appeal. It may not have any national appeal. Within Tigray, I think the debate will go on whether TPLF is the right institution to move Tigray as a region from where it has been to the new phase, although we don't know what the new phase for Ethiopia in general is. But I think after 40, 50 years in politics without any meaningful structural change, at this point in time, TPLF could only wait its demise, not because of losing the war, but because of the fact that there has to be a new thinking, a new idea for the people of Tigray who have been hurt so much, so that the same, just like EPRDF, the same party that has been in power for the Tigray people and put it, whether they generated this or not, but the fact that the people have seen this tremendous destruction, I think there would be a debate to see if TPLF has exhausted its time of existence. I don't think it will have any more impact at the national level. It may mutate into a new party, then it can create new coalitions, but the way it has and what has been said about it and the right or wrong propaganda and narrative built against TPLF, it is in a bad condition to even have appeal beyond the Tigray. So nationally, no. Internally, I think the debate has started with the TPLF is the right institution for Tigray people or not.
That's a good way to see it. But I can see that the TPLF would, the demise of the TPLF would be mainly because of the decay, the internal decay for such a long period of time. But some people say that the dynasty, sometimes they qualify it as the Adwa dynasty has come to an end some years back. Whether that is the case or not, it remains to be seen, as you said. But I just really think that the legacy of the TPLF, because when we talk about the TPLF, for me, there are three issues to consider. One is the political ideology. Two, the structure in place, which has never been touched, including the constitutional arrangement, you name it. And the third, the political practice is still there. So TPLF as a party, as an institution, is quite different from its legacy in terms of the deeply entrenched structure, political practice, if not the ideology. So, but just that being said, I just wanted to add that. Whether you agree with it or not is another issue. But what about the legal aspect? I just forgot. Legally speaking, the TPLF is already dead. So how could it mutate into other forms? Of course, one way of arguing is, as you said, that establishing another disintegration and then establishing and reestablishing another political party. That is possible, quite possible. But legally speaking, it has been sentenced to death, right?
Well, and that's the game the PP regime played with TPLF right before the agreement, the cessation of hostility agreement. TPLF was nullified, and part of the agreement was to reinstate, but through some machination, TPLF is not legally reinstated for practical purposes. I think as to the TPLF ideology, I'm not clear on that. I think if you mean the TPLF ideology, this whole concept of self-determination, the concept of Article 39 and the regionalism that has been created, I believe that is a bit giving them too much credit in terms of they may have presided over the creation, but if you take OLA, if you take OLF, if you take ONLF, if you take Afar, I think that ideology, in my opinion, is a carryover from the 1960s, 1970s left-leaning radical movement that wanted to address the Ethiopia's national question. I think what TPLF's issue and main problem is it is dictatorial, centralist system of administration, yes, that they had internally and that they had also imposed on the country, which PP inherited. The person exists, the party's structure at the top exists, but everybody else who is the government, is employee, is also part of that. Is something we inherited from TPLF. What I called in 1996 an article, the one dominant party system. This came all the way from the days when TPLF was consulted and given idea by Samuel Huntington, who said the only way you can rule is to strengthen the one party dominant system and then go on. That is the legacy. The others are ideas they borrowed from the left, from the Walalans, from the university movement, from Izuna, Ethiopian Student Union, you know them. That's a broader discussion. But I think the dictatorial aspect that we inherited, autocratic nature of a one-party system, that will stay for us until we change something, even with the current system,
Precisely, that is what I was alluding to. I wasn't referring to the ideology, including the right to self-determination and all other stuff, but I was specifically referring to ideology in terms of the dictatorial tendency, one-party system, as well as the so-called democratic centralism. So as to the structure is here to stay, whether the TPLF is there or not for quite some time, unless we establish or re-establish a new political community through genuine political deliberation. But that said, let's move on to what's really happening. How do you see the war in Amhara? Let's start with that, including the diplomatic achievements, if you have seen anything so far, including your own network, and then we move to other issues as well.
Well, yes, I think the Amhara war came at the war in the Amhara region. Let me put it that way, came at a time when also the largest ethnic group in Oromia is also carrying war. So what the diplomatic world is talking about or looking at is, if Ethiopia's close to 65 to 70% population, which are these two regions alone, are in war, that country has no hope practically. When you come to the Amhara region, if you really evaluate very carefully, that region has produced the most skilled, the most educated, the most urbanized people, and the most, if you will, professional army members in the country. You cannot really take a war engineered and started in that region lightly, not to mention the fact that a huge percentage, I don't have exactly the number, but a huge percentage, significant percentage of the population in Addis Ababa also identify themselves as Amara, not to mention a large number of the civil servants in the country also identify themselves as an Amara. With all that resources and, if you will, assets, human and political and social asset, the war started in Amara region, is finally the potential, has the potentiality to break the back of the current system in Ethiopia. Having said that, yes, people don't just pick up arms and fight a sitting government without having questions. I think there have been, whether somebody supports it or not, issues that have been festering among the Amara residents. I think that has now finally seeped into the masses and it became popular. And one is discontent, political and social discontent seeps into the larger society. It's very difficult to stop. Prime Minister Abiy's government has not made a single effort up to this point to really bring this war into its conclusion through peaceful negotiation. Some of us have advocated that maybe it's time to start another Pretoria type, talks with the Amara leadership. If PP is doing, if it has done the same thing for Tigray, doing the same thing for the Oromia war with Ola, I don't see any reason why Prime Minister Abiy would not do the same thing for the Amara war. And I think his talks are offensive and belittle political agenda of social groups. When he calls the warring groups thieves and equates them with daily type thieves, either it's a naivete on his part or a highly developed sense of arrogance and disrespect towards the people who are fighting. And some of his talks in the last presentation at the parliament were very clearly arrogant and dismissive to the people who are in the Amara and Oromia region.
Yeah, exactly. I would like to pick up on the last point that you mentioned, because that is the most current issues we have to reflect upon. Because I see two issues with that. First of all, he was not interested in the damage and the loss of lives and humanitarian costs, as well as the gradual disintegration of the state itself, with huge ramification, not only for his own regime, but for the entire region as well. So whenever he was in front of a mic, he always equates any form of civil resistance or insurgency with his own regime. So yesterday he said, for example, I quote, don't ever think that you are going to topple my government. That's not going to happen, which means that as long as his government is not toppled, he doesn't care about what would happen in the process. That is the first issue. I don't know whether you agree with that or not, then I will come to you. The second issue is that even when the PP regime started talking with the Ola figures or the Oromo Liberation Army, I do not think that they did that out of principle. That didn't happen with the TPLF because they really believed inherently and morally believed in ensuring peace. It's just because of the outcome of the protracted war and exhaustion and external pressure. So you said that if talk is possible with the OLF or OLA, why not with the Amara? I think the OLA forced the Abiy regime to sit for the talks. So I think that is what explains, instead of resorting to a moral and a principled argument. What would you say on that?
No, totally. I agree with you. Prime Minister Abiy doesn't seem to digest an iota of moral politics, if you will. Even with Tigray, despite the cessation of hostility agreement in Pretoria, inflammatory language is always heard from him when he presented as if though he defeated, and he told them a lesson, and that they should never, or any other group that wants to do something that what the TPLF did, they should take a lesson. He's not abiding by the agreement. I think the Ola agreement or talks came as a result of bringing too much pressure on Abiy and outside. That is probably one factor. I think there are many factors that probably brought, I think international pressure is there that has been building both for Oromia as well as for Amara region, as talks being the only way out. I think, in my opinion, I don't know, I could be wrong, but it looks like he's sequencing it and probably thinks that first he will hit the Oromo, then Oromia group, then after that he will start talks, which he did start this talk sometime, and then slowly come to the Amara. I can tell you that the pressure, international pressure, building on him and against him is humongous and huge, given the fact that the only string that's now attached between him or linking between him and the international diplomatic corps is nothing but the fear that Ethiopia may collapse, the government of Ethiopia may collapse. So at this point in time, they are bending their backs to not see that and give Prime Minister Abiy a room to at least give not even a full glass, but even 1/4 of the glass towards peace and reconciliation. The only problem with having peace talks with Prime Minister Abiy and the PP Mogus is that what happens after? He has the tendency to undermine peace agreements after people put down their troops, their weapons, and come to Addis Ababa. It happened to KODF, it happened to ONLF, it happened to OLF, it happened to a certain extent to TPLF. And if the groups who are now out there, particularly Ola, a good student of what had happened in the past and watch what had happened, will they really expect and accept what has happened to the rest and put down their guns and then become a toy for him? Because in my opinion, none of the groups that signed agreement so far got what they wanted in the way that they wanted.
Yeah, but on that issue, Faisal, one might ask you that can you squarely put the burden only on the PP regime or Abiy or the federal government? Do you know the commitment of the other parties that we have mentioned? So, but in short, can we just blame one part of the agreement? And what about the other story?
Yeah, so let's take one by one. I know very well about the Ogaden National Liberation Front. One time, the most armed group, they heard the call for peace and democracy. They came, they put down their guns. And that was the last time anybody talked to them in a meaningful way. They were not given the chance to freely run. See, when we sign this kind of agreements, Mogus, we are expecting free and fair elections, participation in the public process, a movement toward this peace and democracy and equality, what have you. The moment they come to Addis Ababa and they sign the agreement, not only them, even the internal opposition, the tendency of PP is to disarm them and to dislocate them. So I'm highlighting what awaits them. Can you blame the others? For instance, in the TPLF situation, the agreement between TPLF and PP, you could say in terms of the theft of the food aid, both of them participated. In terms of TPLF not opening the gates of participation for other groups and still, manipulating power. Yeah, that's there. But is PP advocating for other Tigray groups to be given a high, prominent positions and prominent role? I don't know, but I think I always put the burden on the government, because the government is Mogus, the guardian of the gates for change. If the government today announces, hopeful type like they did in 2018 chart for moving forward, I believe both the Oromo and the Amara groups, who are the armed groups now, will come and participate. The question is, are we giving them that? Are we giving them a platform for them to come back and participate and put down their guns? I'm not sure if we are giving that to them at this point in time.
Great. Yeah, I agree with you on in a different for different reason, but in terms of outcome, we are on the same boat, because there is a concept of dual responsibility. Government has a dual responsibility as opposed to any armed group or ordinary citizen, precisely because the government is supposed to represent the entire nation. They need to be to have a very tolerant political space, as well as taking initiatives and ensuring that everyone has a fair representation and equal say on the politics of the country. That's it. So if the PP regime cannot be trusted, as many people are suggesting, what can be done? Then negotiation presupposes trust. Not only negotiation, even the peace agreements have a consequence, both legal and a political consequence, a commitment, a sustained commitment. Then what would be the guarantee?
So if you heard Prime Minister Abiy talking at the parliament, he kind of recirculated some weird concepts that I have heard from Lench Oleta and Dr. Dimas, who both of them were former Oromo Liberation Front. They have this theory that says, from now on, nobody can overthrow the government through armed struggle or force. Abiy repeated that. And he said, even in the worst case scenario, the government has access to the tune of $10 billion that it can borrow and use that as weapons, buy heavy weapons or drones, what have you, whereas the groups that are fighting the government don't have anybody. This is something that is now cooked in Addis Ababa by a narrative created for Abiy by some of his heavyweight quote unquote theoretician is coming from the old guard of the Oromo Liberation Front. That's a very dangerous analysis, because basically what they are telling him is, you are the strongest man and you can be upside, and do whatever you want and nobody can overthrow you, because the era of people overthrowing the government by force is gone. Although he was marveling and kind of romantic about the attempt of overthrowing King Haile Selassie, Emperor Haile Selassie, by the Nawai brothers, he looked at that in his presentation in a very romantic, sentimental way. So self-contradiction. I'm not sure that's the right advice to give the Prime Minister at this point in time, because I think if TPLF, or for that matter, any Tigrenya team, Amara group and Oromo groups and other Somali in the East coordinate their armed struggle, and that's the worst case scenario, it would not be that difficult to overthrow the government in Addis Ababa. So let's not wish that might is right, as now Abiy and his theoreticians say. What are the options? I think it looks like Prime Minister Abiy and PP is resolute in not listening to us, to our cries for reform. Basically, from his talks at the parliament, it was very clear that this man is here for the long haul, not 2 years, not 4 years, not 5 years, probably as much as his. See, so we can talk about that later on in terms of his legacy. What can we do? I think some people, I've heard a lot of people exchanging.
I think Faisal, it's better, as you said, to come. It's better to come about that in our way out on the solution, what to do.
Okay.
Maybe that's a wrongly put question. Staying on what the Prime Minister said yesterday about his rhetoric, he said the following, and I quote, he said, he said that his regime, his government never started any war or conflict in the last 5 years. That's what he said. And what is your take on that?
Well, I thought he started the law and order war. and I think he started also the Amara war. And I'm saying this because, see, we're not talking to lay people, we're talking to sophisticated people like us and everybody else who can analyze. State has one asset that nobody else has: the right of violence. It can stop violence, it can also initiate violence. A group can initiate violence, but the state has the tools and the resources to negotiate with that group and bring them in and listen to their talks. Governments in the world have even negotiated with narco terrorist groups and brought them to the table. For Abiy to say that he has not started a single war when this country has waged 4 plus the current one, 5 wars or phases of wars in the last 5 years, it's just a man who's running away from his responsibility. I didn't find it that credible. I think it is again uh, uh, something that we have seen redundantly and repeatedly with the prime minister, where he does not own when he breaks something. He broke this country. He started these wars. Even if he has not started these wars, he's responsible for the crimes and the damage. And I'll tell you one thing: the Amara example is a very good one. The Amara Fano groups who are now warring him were his allies when he declared that he was abolishing the Liu police, and they said they are not ready to disarm. That was not really a war. That was just a sort of minimum ideological rebellion to say, no, we are not ready to be disarmed because we don't see protection in place for us. That was the time that he could have sat with them around the table and say, what is the minimum you accept and what's the maximum you refuse? For instance, there could have been a transition to disarm and abolish the Liu police, which could have taken a series of years, 4 to 5 years, phased out from year 1 to year 2. But to impose people on something that they are resisting, of course they will rebel. And you don't look at what the action, you usually look at what has started. And I think Abiy's actions have started the wars that we are now nursing. The same with Ola. Oromo Liberation Front came through a peace negotiation, put down their guns. In few months, they went back, not because they wanted to go back to the war, but because he reneged on the agreement that he established with them. So I thought that was very strange for him.
Yeah, the jury is out there, so I shall leave that for everyone to judge. But suffice to say that you explained one of the instances where we can clearly demarcate who did what, and at least when we understand the causes of war, the structural causes of war. I mean, it's not that difficult. Yeah.
If I go back, although I may not support both TPLF or Fano, but when TPLF signed the agreement, and they still retain close to 250,000 armed groups, and they are not disarmed, although the cessation of hostility had a structured disarmament, but because of technical issues, TPLF is not disarmed. So if Amara group who were fighting against them say we cannot disarm at this point in time because our nemesis is not disarmed, as a neutral person, you see the clear line here. You say, right, especially when the state is weak and the northern Ethiopia is highly armed and every community is armed to the teeth. If a group says, no, we're not ready to disarm because we don't see something that we can lean on, I think they should have been listened, in my opinion, and that could have been the course to a peaceful action on both sides.
Yeah, that is what I think. That's what I said actually 6 months ago. We are in a typical security dilemma. So in the midst of security dilemma, you can not just tell your neighbor that the knife I am buying, the brand new knife I'm buying today is not going to be used to stab you. Because if you are in a security dilemma, every movement counts and it has a meaning. It has a ramification for your own neighbor. So,
and Mogus, the biggest discussion among Somalis and in the Somali region is why did we get disarmed when everybody else is armed? That's basically because they don't see protection from the state if anything happens. And as you know, there are intercommunal conflict along the border lines, and Somalis have a long border with the Afar and the Oromo and what have you. So the biggest discussion, internal discussion among Somalis, that they have mistakenly and prematurely disarmed. I'm not saying they should have been armed or maintained, but that is again the concern that's everywhere. So with the Amara to early on say no, they are not an outlier in my opinion. They were reacting to their dilemma, as you say.
Yeah, we could talk the whole day about the security dilemma and the political discourses associated to it. But for now, I think it all boils down in retrospect about the issue of trust deficit. So without trust, whatever you do will never be translated or interpreted in any way positive as long as you do not earn trust. When I speak about trust, I'm not just talking about some goods that is out there. I'm referring to a trust which must be earned as a government. So I think it is a long way even to repair the damage and reestablish the trust, if any, between those communities. That said, one final question on the Amara issue. Do you see a progress from the political point of view, including diplomacy, on the Amhara struggle over the last, as compared to where it was started maybe 6 months ago, even a year ago?
Yeah, I think for the Amhara, they have one cash, political cash or political capital that most others may not have, and that is a very huge and well-organized diaspora group, particularly in the area of DC and that whole belt of the DC area. And I'm talking about America. In the last 4 or 5 months, they have really done significant work. They have had in-depth talks with key congressional members. They have had inroads to the State Department. Their voices have been listened. They brought their cry, if you will, to corridors of power in Washington. And I think in addition to what others have done, such as the Somalis and the Oromo and the Tigray communities, the Amara punch is very much felt at the diplomatic level. And I think that's going far enough to put enough pressure on Abiy to close doors on this war and other wars. And I think, as I said earlier, combined Amara and Oromo population to the tune of 65 to 70% of the Ethiopian population, if this war is go on, Ethiopia could easily be broken in the back. And whether you are pro-PP or against PP, these two wars are very dangerous. The Oromo war is close to Addis Ababa. The Amara war has, as I said, tremendous socio-political asset that they can master against this in this war. And so far, we see that. And also, if these two regions continue the war, the famine and the death and the destruction could be 20 times that of Tigray we have seen. So it's everybody's interest to find a different way than this course that we are traveling now.
Yeah, the vibrations will be felt everywhere in the country. And the Amara uprising has, I have always described it as a double-edged sword. And on the one hand, you know, that the very regime and the structures and even the Ethiopian state or Ethiopianism somehow is founded on the Amara, not the Amara nationalism, but the Ethiopian nationalism, and they are somehow sober. Their nationalism was not as strong as we see it today. And now it has become so reactionary for the obvious reason, for the understandable reason. So on the one hand, it is a blessing that they are rising up and their cry is being heard and their pain is being felt. But on the other hand, that it might, as you say, once again, be the last things that breaks the camel's back. So that's it. Let's move to the talk in Oromia. What would you expect? We have already touched upon the driving factors, but what would you expect from this talk, Faisal?
It's really difficult. If the talks are to join PP and Ola to put down the guns, what is Ola looking for? See, we need to really go deep into Ola's program. Is Ola satisfied to be a fiddler, play a fiddler to Abiy and Shimalis? What is Ola's agenda? Does it want a full democratic rights for the people of Oromia? Does it want a complete independence? Does it want a phased program towards independence to the creation of Oromia? What is Ola's program? If it is to just join Shimalis MPP, that would be very easy to wrap up these talks. If it is to really raise some of the critical issues that we have been hearing from some corners of Oromo movement, including the issue of Addis Ababa / Finfinne, the issue of Oromia or Afan Oromo as the national language, the issue of quasi full autonomy within Ethiopia or complete. All those are to be sorted out. The easier and the simpler the issue that Ola puts on the table, the quicker they can see. Although TPLF was stronger in terms of army and weapons and what have you, but TPLF was always reluctant to raise the issue of secession or independence, although some people may say that it had in the background, but I think for practical purposes, they never say it. Ola has been talking about Oromia, Oromo independence, and what have you. So if they put the easier questions on the table, an agreement can be reached. From what I see now, I think it will take several rounds to soften out the issues and come to sort of an agreement. But in this one, I'm not really sure. Just simply take the issue of Addis Ababa. What is Ola's stance on Addis Ababa? Is PP ready to accept Ola's stance on Addis Ababa, or is Ola ready to accept that Addis Ababa is the way it is? I'm not 100% sure. So the negotiation could be to start with stopping the war and then talking. That may be possible. But as we heard yesterday, the PP's regime was talking about intensifying its war, and the rhetoric didn't seem like one that's close to peace. If, and I will stop here, if the previous talks with Ola is an indication, Mogas, they were like day and night. They were far apart from each other.
Yeah, but on this, there are two issues to attend to, Faisal. Probably one of them you have already heard now and again, time and again, which is that some people even go as far as saying there is no any conceivable reason for the two groups to fight. In a sense, what is the difference between the PP and the Ola to fight? Because they hail from the same constituency, they have the same ideology, and they wish to establish the same political system. So why are they fighting after all? I think you have heard that. So if you may reflect on that, and then we can move ahead.
Yeah, I think they may have some similarities, but I think the PP OPDO, now turned PP Oromo elite clique, is out there for a dominance, to dominate Ethiopia within the name of Ethiopia, so that blanketing themselves on the Ethiopian flag, want to dominate. With Ola, at least rhetorically, they are talking about, giving each and every Ethiopian group the right to administer themselves and probably bring some sort of cooperation, collaboration with other communities. Now, whether that is just on the books or they will enforce, we don't know. But I think Abiy and PP just inherited, and I talked about that at the Minnesota conference, OPDO's culture, which is rob, kill other people, and take the power if possible in Addis Ababa. That is the agenda of PP and Abiy. Whether Ola is that, I'm not sure. If Ola is still adherent to the old Oromo Liberation frontage program, there may be areas where we can agree or disagree, even if they promote Oromo agenda. The same thing with Tigray, they can promote the Tigray agenda. The same with Amara and Somali, what have you. But at least we know what PP is. PP is a clique of OPDO, former OPDO leaders who really see this time, their time and forever, to dominate Ethiopia under the name of PP, but with a clique of Oromo elite, not Oromo masses, Oromo elite. Ola, I'm not sure. They are still in the face of struggle, and we can only evaluate on their program and what they say, and they don't say much except what OLF left as a program in their days.
Yeah, but yeah, this leads to one seemingly legitimate concern that in the modern age, no reasonable government which considers itself as a legitimate, in quotation, government would ever allow anything which is against the very existence of the state. In a sense, if Ola is going to put something on the territorial integrity of the state, how would that kind of negotiation proceed? I mean, you may say that I want confederation, I want Ethiopia, the Ethiopian empire, as they say, to disintegrate and end once and for all. But would that be reasonable? And when I say reasonable, even the international community, even recognize, forget the constitution for now, because with the TPLF, remember what happened during the negotiation, during the war. So don't you think that that's a legitimate concern if the rest of the world in Ethiopia says that, oh, no, you can ask anything, but not the very existence of the state?
Yes, I think that's concern, and the issue of confederation or secession should not, and will not come at this level of negotiation. I think because you're right, there are many constituents involved in whether Ethiopia goes into confederation or another form of system of governance. That's not between Ola and PP. That is within the spectrum of the Ethiopian population, and that may be another day. I think what this, if them, and I hope there are experts who are on both sides, knowledgeable of mediation and negotiation. You start with a small attainable goals. The confederation is not an attainable goal at this table. The issue of complete secession from Ethiopia by Ola, if that's their intent, that is not also the right venue. There are other venues later on. I think what this venue can permit are 6-7 general points. I don't have that, but I can imagine, stopping the war, working on, future talks that are inclusive, making sure that reconstruction, something like that, and then open the doors for future negotiations and political dispensation as to what that will look like. Because when it comes to Ethiopia's political dispensation, one single group at this point in time is not determined, especially when you are on the government side. The pressure, and there is where Abiy and the PP gets some support from a lot of, they have to represent, whether we like it or not, formally, they represent the rest of Ethiopia at this negotiation, where Ola only represents Ola supporters, whether that's the entire Oromia people or the section of the Oromo population who support. So they're not in a balance. So at the end of the day, the only thing that the government of Ethiopia can talk with this group would be small issues that are legitimate and acceptable to both sides, not the big programs. That will come later on. That will come in a referendum. That will come. Even the issue of Walqait and Western Tigray could not be resolved by the cessation of hostility at Pretoria. That's why it was reverted for another. So I hope they will come to a position where they stop the war. And that could be an example for the Amara region. But the question, Mogus, that we don't know is, does Prime Minister Abiy and his group use this kind of negotiation towards the movement of peaceful and comprehensive dialogue with all, or they just want to get a quick satisfaction, break the back of the army of the Ola and the Amara, and then move on. I'm not sure, but it's a challenge.
Yeah, let's move to the final question. The Red Sea and access to port fiasco. And this has been with us for the long, when I say with us, in terms of agenda, in terms of hot potato. It has become a hot potato over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And we couldn't resist the temptation to discuss. That's why we convened a panel discussion 3 weeks ago, which was very successful, by the way. If our audiences have not watched it yet, please go and watch. You can find it in the YouTube channel. Where Mr. Faisal himself has participated. It was a nice discussion. So in light of yesterday's discussion, there has been a renewed, again, discussion that was ignited by the Prime Minister's explanation. Some people say it is contradictory, and some others say it is very clear. Some people are saying, no, he's so pacific in a sense that he's not preparing for war. And some other people are saying he's actually preparing for war. So there are 3 different interpretation of what Prime Minister said yesterday in the light of what has happened before over the last 3-4 weeks. What do you make of that? And how can we avoid a catastrophe if there is a possibility?
So I think nobody should take Abiy's rhetoric lightly. As we said today and started with this discussion with, he has managed over several wars within his own country. So the tendency for him to jump into the fray is there. We have seen enough. With the Red Sea, I think he has now mentioned several countries, Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, and even Kenya. He added Kenya also to the list by just saying, these are the countries we have stake with, and we're not gonna go into war. I think at one point he is confused in the sense that he wants to make a legitimate case for Ethiopia as to why Ethiopia needs to own a port. At other times, his reasoning is something that Ethiopia always opposed. Ethiopia always accused other countries that had territorial ambition is, sort of irredentist and what have you. And it's always Ethiopia stood on the position that Somalia was irredentist against it. Many people disagree. Abiy is now becoming the biggest irredentist in the Horn of Africa. He's putting claim over, Eritrea, Red Sea, at times, Zaila and Somalia and Djibouti. I don't know if what he is saying is really preparing for war, or he is just crying over the shoulders of the people of Ethiopia, because in every way possible, Abiy is a failure. The other day, Mogus, if I just add this, I tweeted and said Haile Selassie had the enviable legacy of modernizing Ethiopia, even bringing some regions that were outside the Ethiopian arm back to Ethiopia, not back to Ethiopia, Eritrea, the Ogaden, and the Houth. Very enviable legacy, and he modernized the Ethiopian state from the Lijiyasu era to the Derg resolved the biggest issue of feudalism in the Horn of Africa, landed to the tiller, and he gave billions of acres of land back to the tilleries, from Gojam all the way to Jigjiga. Meles Zenawi had at least the legacy of saying, I created a federal system that's working, and then the dam and the economy, as we said. By the way, 2012 was the last time we registered 10% on around that. Abiy tried to look for a legacy. He looked at the legacy to defeat TPLF. TPLF is there. He tried to convince us that the demonstration projects that are useless to the Ethiopian masses is his legacy, like building a palace that's bigger than what Menelik left, that couldn't sail and couldn't, be swallowed by the Ethiopian people, because one piece of potato in Ethiopia or one tomato is, so expensive that an average person cannot buy. So he probably is looking for a legacy. So I don't know if this is the Red Sea is his legacy, and he wants to hang and he wants to busy the people of Ethiopia on this. The debate over Ethiopia needing a Red Sea outlet is very difficult to sell to the international world, to the regional, to IGAD, to the Horn of Africa countries, as well as to a large section of the Ethiopian people. Why? Why do you have to go to war in order to have access to a port? His reason is because first he said we were paying a lot, which became false. I tweeted a few years ago when I talked to Djibouti minister, who said that's not true. What they say that 25% is not true. Now he's saying that we will starve if we don't have a port. We will starve, which will make Ethiopians cannibals, go out and eat whatever they can. I mean, that's the most irresponsible diplomatic language a prime minister can say in his neighbor. So I don't know. I think Ethiopia can thrive without owning a port. Port use is nothing more than a diplomatic relationship with Djibouti, with Eritrea, with Somalia. And it's really very sad, Mogus, to see the goodwill some of us may not have agreed with, but the goodwill that was established between a large section of the people of Ethiopia and Eritrea during that war to be smoked by Abiy just lightly, instead of just showing good faith. And you and I have probably our stand against the dictator in Asmara, but at the greater good level, he had a lot of opportunity to cash on the goodwill that were established between Ethiopia and Eritrea, at least between Ethiopian people at a large scale and Eritreans by far, and could have used it now because he's frustrated with something, he's waging war. I don't know. Is he ready for war? He says he's not, but we have to see.
And can I take your word for his waging war for granted? That because his waging war is a bit a strong statement unless we back it with empirical evidence from his own speech, including that's why I brought in the events over the last few weeks. So I wasn't solely focusing on what he said yesterday, but in totality, whether he's preparing for war or not, that is something. But don't you think that it is fair to say paying exorbitant amount, which I mean unreasonable amount, is not a way, is a healthy way to deal with an economy and a nation with more than 120 million plus? I mean, is that not reasonable to say that what we are paying is too much?
Absolutely. The mechanics of your economy and how you solve that is always left for the professionals. From what I understand from Djibouti ministers, two of them I talked to, the rent that Djibouti takes as a rent for the port is very minimal. What Ethiopia spends is close to 80% of the cost is transportation and hauling products back and forth. Now, even if you own a port, that transportation will be there. Is Ethiopia complaining about the 10, 15, 8% rental money it's paying to Djibouti? Is he complaining about Germany and America and China and others having bases in Djibouti? What is he complaining? If it is the rent, he can negotiate. He can even exchange. All the countries surrounding Ethiopia are saddled with heavy payment for their electric power. I know Djibouti, an average middle class like you and myself, paid about $500 a month in dollars a month for their home electrification alone. Ethiopia can think of many ways to really do the exchange between the port service it receives and what it can give. You cannot just jump on the possibility of saying we need the port, we are paying more, and we have to have it. And as you say, he has mentioned a lot. He mentioned the port, he mentioned sea access, he mentioned the navy, he mentioned product is passing between the Red Sea and the Arabian Gulf. What is he talking about? What is his issue? If it is the rent, let's negotiate. People negotiate and bring prices down to an unacceptable level. and he has not shared with the public of Ethiopia what percentage is paid as a rent and what percentage is spent on transport. If he gets his Berbera, he will still be pulling products all the way from Berbera to Addis Ababa and Gojam and Jimma, which is a large land to cover. That will always be there. So the 10% gap and rent, that can be dealt with through negotiation, but I don't think that is what he's saying.
And lastly, I also saw that you reshared one of the short clip from the Prime Minister hinting at the possibility of confederation without having a proper steady consultation with the stakeholders, or even laying the foundation for having some form of economic integration before the political integration of the region. Be that as it may, what would you make of that? Do you think that is a negative development, or you take it with kind of pinch of salt, or can you say that is a good phase proposal by the Prime Minister?
It's a good thinking, but it's not a good faith from the Prime Minister. I think any intellectual analysis would tell you that the Horn of Africa needs integration. As you know, Somalia decided to integrate with the East African Commission. If there was an Horn of Africa integration, there is no reason why Somalia would have gone that far. Ethiopia seems to be the huge country, the one that would have brought, if you will, for the lack of a better word, the neighbors, the children, the cousins together. Now Ethiopia is becoming the force that's dispersing. And Abiy said this in front of Somali President Farmacho last time at Villa Somalia, that we will have integration and confederation. Good idea, but we are not on the right path for that, because with Eritrea and Ethiopia at loggerheads, after they went into this massive unnecessary war against their own people for Ethiopia with Tigray. But if Abiy really wants to integrate, he wants to do several things, and we can go back maybe later on. Stop the war.
Yeah, I mean, we're already
stop the wars in Amara and Oromia. Bring the Amara, Oromo, and others to the table. Make your country peaceful. Bring everybody around the table. Show sign of democratization. Then start talking to the two lenient group, in my opinion, Somalia and Djibouti, whose governments are not as stringent in terms of social issues as they are. And then I'm not worried about Eritrea, because I am of the belief, Mogus, that Isaias has very short time in life, anywhere from 4 to I'm not gonna put time on his life, but I think given his age, he will not be here for a long time. So to think, and that's why it hurts for Abiy to spoil the relationship.
Well, evil people and dictators don't die too early most of the time.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I'm just thinking in the coming 10 years or so, in which case Abiy should have not spoiled the goodwill that has been established between you and I know how one time Eritrea and Ethiopia, where they were far apart, they came together, although for a wrong reason, but nonetheless there was some cohesion that was established among people and activists and political elites and what have you. I think he could have waited. I think he could have said, now he's smoking that, he's destroying that goodwill between the groups. So he can still start, lower down the rhetoric, work on the home front, bring to closure the Amara war, the Oromia war, start, showing good faith that he's working on democratization. Then let's move after that to the so-called confederation, what have you, which will benefit the region quite a lot. In which case, Ethiopia may not even need to own a port, but it may use as many people. I'm not of the opinion that he should, and you said wage, he should even talk about war or war-like rhetoric for the sake of a port, because port is at the disposal of Ethiopia. It's just a diplomatic issue that he's missing. And with that miss, he's trying to cover by war narrative, in my opinion.
That's perfect. So one last thing, I read that from the from the Financial Times and also for the Foreign Affairs magazine a couple of days ago. One of the quotes says, "The last thing Abiy need is another war." That is the title, and I would like to modify it. It is not that Abiy never had a problem, as you said, because he has a tendency of jumping straight into the frying pot. But the last thing Ethiopia needs and the Horn of Africa need is a war. It's better to put it that way. So do you, in terms of the confederation and integration, my only final point would be, you need to be at peace with yourself, and you need to integrate even within Ethiopia before integrating the region. Even the Ethiopian people and nations and nationalities are not integrated enough before we talk about regional integration and the ideal utopia in the region. So that's it. Do you really see the potential war breaking out in the Horn of Africa, particularly between Eritrea and Abiy? And if so, I've asked you, if so, what do we need to do? That's my last question. And
so far, we see signs of discomfort on both sides and disarticulation. I heard that some countries, particularly the United Arab Emirates and China, are putting enough pressure for war not to take place in the country. And I think I put that tweet some days ago, about a week and a half ago. The US does not want that war, although they may not like Isaias. The State Department also put its word out there that war is not a solution. There is nobody. I think Isaias has been very restrained on this issue so far. He has said less, and he indicates that he's not interested in the war. I think the Saudis are also not interested in war. From Turkish authors and writers, they are also weary about any war taking place in Ethiopia. In the last Tigray versus central government of Ethiopia, Turkey was very busy supporting the government. So was the United Arab Emirates, so was the Saudi. All those forces are telling Abiy not to start the war. Simply,
by the way, do you see? Sorry to interrupt. Do you see the crisis in Gaza or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict playing out in this front in the Horn of Africa in terms of diplomacy, as you said, in terms of restraint, in terms of enabling and constraining factors?
Yeah, I read that little thing Alex Sitiwal wrote. I think you can stretch always when there is a war in the region. It may have impact. I think Israelis and Ethiopians used to have good relationship. I don't know how good that is, but the very fact that the Red Sea is there, and both Eritrea and Ethiopia are active players in that area, and the Somalis and the Saudis. Yes, there may be powers to vie for attention, and if Isaias gets close to the Saudi and the Arabs, Abiy may have the chance to get close to the Israelis and vice versa. So that equation is always there. But as to the current Gaza crisis, there's no direct impact, I would say, on Ethiopia. But the potential, if the war stays, and then see, I think about 6 months ago, Mogus, I told with this idea, and I see now getting currency. In the old days, we used to have the big powers and the third world, and we were the third world. And you can go to Russia or to America and vice versa, your enemy. There is a third party now in power that has emerged mainly from the Middle East, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, Saudi, Iran, what have you. And more than anybody, these powers have direct impact on Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, and Sudan, more than any other, not even so much on Kenya. So this new third power is very active in the Gaza conflict. Whichever way the wind blows, definitely both Ethiopia and Eritrea will look at where they can fit in that equation. And I would be very seriously looking at how that movement takes place. So yes, it may not be directly now, but if this war continues and the Arabs get involved, definitely it will have impact on us.
What a great way to end. Would you be kind enough to leave us with your last message for today? I don't like this last remark or conclusion. I would rather prefer the last message for today, because we're going to reconvene anytime soon. So
yes, I think I don't like the way Abiy is coining and fashioning the political issues in Ethiopia. Those of us who have been around have known that Ethiopia have had question is that it has been struggling, mainly rooted in the modernization and democratization of the state structure. The people have never been at loggerhead with each other. How else can anybody tell anybody that the Amara hates the Tigray hates the Amara, or the Oromo hates the Amara? No, and coming from the east, you cannot find a single incident where a Somali does something negative on Amara or vice versa. It's not the people's thing. The struggle has been how to democratize the Ethiopian state so that it works well for everybody, regardless of where they are from, and also move to a democratic. So Prime Minister Abiy and his team shun away from that. Instead of putting the critique against the state and saying that as leaders of the state, we have failed to give what the people want. What the people want is good economic growth, services, peace, and democratization, so that I can go to my small town and vote for a mayor who runs 1,000 residents versus Addis Ababa with 4+ million people. We want that structure. Instead of really looking at that, they take the issue and they act as if though people are destroying Ethiopia, people hate Ethiopia, people come from nowhere like hooligans and fight again. No. People have been fighting in Ethiopia all the way across, from the coup that he mentioned, which is Nawai, Mengistu Nawai, and Girma Nawai, who is very dear to the people, to the city that I come from, Jijiga, who was really one of the best mayors that we have seen for a short period of time. The issue has been democratization, peace, services, and security. If Prime Minister Abiy wants to focus on that, then people can probably put down the guns and work around that. But as long as he shuns away from that issue, Ethiopia will see war.
Thank you very much, Faisal. It has always been a pleasure talking to you, but as well as also listening to you and learning from you. Thank you very much for today. I think we shall continue Ethiopia Today podcast from time to time. And I wish you all the best for our audiences. Thank you for your time and attention and giving us your expert opinion. With that, we shall end our today's podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
የሐሳብ ገበታ ሐሳብ ያለ ልዩነት ሚዛናዊነት እንዲሁም በአሳታፊነት የሚንሸራሸርበት ቤት። በሐሳብ ገበታችን ወቅታዊ፣ ማህበራዊ፣ ፖለቲካዊ እንዲሁም የህግ ጉዳዮች በስፋት በጥልቀትና በአካታችነት ይቀርባሉ። የሳምንቱ እንግዳ የሳምንቱ ለተጋባዥ ማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች፣ ፖለቲከኞች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች የሚቀርቡበት ፕሮግራም ወቅታዊ ጉዳይ፣ ወቅታዊ ሀገራዊ ጉዳዮች የሚዳሰሱበት ዝግጅት፣ የውይይትና የክርክር መድረክ፣ በተለያየ ጎራ የሚገኙ ታላላቅ ፖለቲከኞች፣ የማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች በሐሳብ ዙሪያ ፊት ለፊት የሚወያዩበት ከዛም አልፎ የሚሟገቱበት ፕሮግራም፣ ህዝባዊ መድረክ፣ የተለያዩ ጉዳዮች ላይ ሁሉም የሐሳብ ገበታ ቤተሰቦች በቀጥታ ሐሳባቸውን የሚያቀርቡበትና ተሳታፊ የሚሆኑበት ለቤተሰቦቻችን እድል የምንሰጥበት ጊዜም። እነዚህና ሌሎች ሳምንታዊ ፕሮግራሞችን ለእናንተ እናቀርባለን። ይህንን የተወደደ ቻናል ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ ቤተሰብ ይሁኑ፣ በስፋት ተደራሽ እንዲሁም ለሌሎች ያጋሩም። የሐሳብ ገበታው እንዲጠናከር በተሻለ ጥራትና ስፋት ወደ እናንተ እንዲደርስ በሐሳቦ በሙያውና በገንዘቡ ይደግፉን። የሐሳብ ገበታን በሱፐር ቻት፣ በሱፐር ታንክስ እና በሱፐር ስቲከር አጋርነቱን ያሳዩን። በጎፈንድሚ አማራጭ የሐሳብ ገበታን ያበረታቱ። ስለ ሐሳብ አስተያየቶ እንዲሁም ድጋፎም እናመሰግናለን። ዓላማችን የሐሳብ ማህበረሰብ መፍጠር ነው። የሐሳብ